About a week ago, I was lucky enough to get my hands on an early build of the Space Marine 2 VR experience by Zero Latency at my nearest Meet Space VR location. They were kind enough to have me down with a group of me and some of my family who are very big Warhammer fans, as am I, to try out the experience before it opens its doors to the public. And I gotta tell you, being immersed in the world of Warhammer like never before, and fighting alongside your fellow Primaris Space Marines in VR was nothing short of fantastic. So join me and let's break down the experience of a Space Marine in VR. Now, first of all, we got to make some clarifications because there's going to be a couple of different people watching this video. Some will be my regular viewers who are PSVR2 users, essentially. But this is not a PSVR2 experience. This is exclusive to these VR arcade sort of areas run by Zero Latency. The next group of people are just going to be Warhammer fans who aren't really familiar with virtual reality. There'll be a couple of terms in this video that I throw around that will be very VR specific. I'll do my best to explain what those are while trying to keep it fairly brief. But to make this video more of a palatable experience, I'm going to break this up between Zero Latency as a VR kind of company and dev and experience, and then we'll head into the Space Marine experience itself, how it compares to the flat screen game, what you're going to be expecting in terms of fights, guns, and the overall mission itself. Because there is a distinction to be made between those, because this was actually my first experience with Zero Latency. I had done a VR arcade experience like this many years ago down in London, which was Star Wars themed, but it's been a while since I've actually got hands-on with a VR game like this, where it is just you in a room where you can walk around freely with a couple of other people in the same space. So it was quite a fresh experience for me because I hadn't experienced this in a very long time. So Zero Latency offers this experience up to 8 players, I believe, and gone are the days of having a backpack on your back with kind of like a mini PC running the game for you. This is full Gen 3 VR, so it's completely wireless. You go in, you have your briefing before you actually do the mission, you put on your headset and grab a gun, and that's it. It's a wonderfully light and good experience, and essentially this immerses you in the VR world. You head out into the arena, and you do the mission with your friends or family that you brought along. The gun itself that they give to you has a grenade function, a reload function, and of course a trigger, and this will be what you use to interact with the world. The last time I did an experience like this, there was kind of finicky hand tracking, which was cool, but it was a bit gimmicky because it wasn't really on point. But nowadays with the Zero Latency stuff, there is no hand tracking. You just get this gun, and when you look around, you can see the other players' movements as they move the gun around and tilt their head and all that good stuff. But this is very focused on the weapon that you have in your hands. That's what you're going to be using to interact with the world, usually by shooting stuff. The actual experience lasts around 30 minutes for most of these experiences, and Space Marine Defenders of Avarax is the same. And I gotta be honest, the actual experience and how seamless this was, even for a preview and early release build, was pretty damn great. When it comes to retail and this thing launching, I think on the 27th, you're going to be in for a very good time. The staff are always wonderful. It's really easy to pick up and play even if you've never done VR before, and overall my experience with Zero Latency as a kind of company and as sort of as a product, if you want to put it in that way, was nothing short of great. So only good things to report there. Now that we've established that and what Zero Latency actually is in terms of getting you on board and into these VR experiences, let's talk about the good stuff, which of course is Space Marine. So, Defenders of Avarax has you take on the role of a Primaris Space Marine in the Ultramarine chapter, the same as the flat screen video game. This is a direct tie-in taking place before the original game, but if you're just a Warhammer fan and you haven't got your hands on Space Marine 2 yet, for whatever reason, this won't really spoil anything for you, so you can go in and give it a go, or you can bring some friends and family along that don't know anything about Warhammer and you'll still have a good time 100%. The build of the game that we were playing was early, so things like resolution and frame rate I can't really comment on the final build of the game, but they were by no means bad in the build that we were playing. The final build will run at 120 Hz. If you are a VR veteran or a VR player, you'll know that 120 is a fantastic frame rate to be hitting. Non-reprojected, awesome stuff. Our build was a little bit below that, but really not that far off, so I'm confident that they'll get that up and running for the full release, which is out by now when this video goes live. And this pre-release build was also running at 720p, when the actual build will be running at 2K per eye, so it'll be about a 4 times jump in terms of detail and resolution actually in the headset. That was probably the biggest thing that I could really take away negatively from this, but it isn't actually a negative because the actual experience, like with the Far Cry 1 and with Outbreak that Zero Latency run, and all their other experiences, they are crystal clear. And Space Marine Defenders of Avarax will also be crystal clear upon release. Just wanted to put that out there though, because I can't really comment on resolution because we are playing an early build. However, I can tell you that the models in this experience are either taken from Space Marine 2 or developed very closely in terms of the actual physical minis and models that were studied, because the world of Warhammer is recreated very faithfully here to a very high level of detail. Whether it's the hive cities, the las cannon battery emplacements, the Cadian guardsmen that you can find standing at their posts, or the Tyranids that you fight throughout the experience. Everything is brought to life amazingly well here, and as we've all been playing Warhammer for well over a decade now, I gotta say, seeing this in VR at a massive budget scale compared to, say, Battle Sister, which is another VR game that I played a little while ago in the Warhammer universe, it's night and day between that and this. So much care has been put into each of the environments, and it feels like you're in the video game at the same scale.
Man, yeah, it's sick seeing a city like this.
Additionally to this, everybody around you are Space Marines. You all feel incredibly tall as you walk around, and I found myself doing a very stupid Space Marine walk as I walked around because you feel like you're embodying that player model and character. You don't actually have a full body IK system in this, which is essentially legs and arms and a body that you can see. You are just kind of like a floating gun, but everyone around you can see them as a full Space Marine, which is pretty cool. And the plot of this thing is you're just going to get an artifact, killing Tyranids on the way, and then getting out of there, just like a Space Marine 2 mission. To do this, you'll have access to various guns like plasmas, flamers, melters, bolters, and heavy bolters. There's quite a lot of choice here, and they'll be in the form of drop pods. You'll be traversing around the environment. There'll be a drop pod, you can walk near it, and then you'll pick up a heavy or special weapon. These are really fun to use, offer some good gameplay changes in terms of how you can take on Tyranids. A personal favourite for me was the Melter. It has very similar visual and particle effects to the flat screen Space Marine game. You can absolutely melt through Tyranids with it. It was absolutely fantastic. But if you're a Warhammer fan, it's going to be great to hold these weapons in virtual reality and take on Tyranids with them. Each of these special weapons have a couple of charges, and then once they're done, you'll be back to your main bolter, and that also includes an underbarrel grenade launcher, which is a load of fun to use as well. It's activated with a front pump of an underbarrel, basically primer, at the front of your VR gun controller, and then you can fire it off with the trigger pull, and it's incredibly satisfying blowing up hordes of Tyranids as they're coming towards you. On that note, Space Marine VR Defenders of Avarax was very, very close to the scale of the flat screen game. You can see gargoyles flying around, you can have loads of Hormagaunts charging at you and trying to kill you. And while the scale never reaches the peak of the flat screen game with those massive battles, the number of enemies it throws at you in hordes is surprisingly similar to the smaller to medium scale battles from the flat screen game, which I really didn't expect here. That similar feeling of being overwhelmed by Hormagaunts and warriors and gargoyles in the flat screen game is very much present here, and there were several instances where we were blasting away at endless Tyranids, trying to cover each other's backs and get the mission done, and by the end, it's actually a bit of a workout, especially with the amount of running that you'll do in later stages. There are 4 enemy types, which is the warrior, the gargoyle, the Hormagaunt, and spoilers, although I'll be talking about this a little bit more in depth in a second, a hive tyrant. And throughout the half-an-hour long mission, these offer a good sense of variety in terms of what you're fighting. In terms of movement as well, this is probably what blew me away the most in terms of the zero latency VR experience and how Space Marine handled it, is that you're in a 15 meter squared room, I think. It has inflatable walls, so if you do end up running into them, if you're really panicking or something, you'll just come bouncing off. But ideally, you won't do that because the game does have markers and blinders to tell you when you're getting close to walls or other players so you don't crash into them, with a little audio cue and a red wall that pops up, which is very helpful. But the way you actually traverse around this environment is simply by walking. It's such a weird thing to do in virtual reality after so long I've been using joysticks, essentially. On PSVR2, on Quest, on PCVR, actually being able to walk around an arena and get from A to B simply as you would in real life is such a silly thing to bring up as a mind-blowing factor, but it really is when you're conditioned to feel like in virtual reality you can't just do that because usually you're in your small room. But in this arena, it took a while to get used to walking an objective just with your legs. Similar to this, there are inclines in the game. So as you walk in the game, you'll gain elevation, but in real life, of course, you're just walking on a flat surface, which felt a little bit weird, but kind of cool. The most impressive bit about this locomotion, though, was the mapping of the actual experience itself. It'll split your group in 2. So for us, there were 4 people playing, so 2 went one way and 2 went the other. You each had to accomplish a different objective, say one starts a generator while one other defends an area, and the game will have you stand on 2 different platforms and then will take you to a different area through a lift. So, the other players that you've just been with will be completely out of sight. It'll feel like they're really far away, when in reality, they're standing right next to you, and the game will cleverly map out your area so that you never walk into them or anywhere near them. It's a little hard to explain, but it's really ingenious how the game directs you into certain areas and makes you forget that you're in this arena at all. It really tricks you into thinking that you're walking through a vast open space by making you cover a lot of ground and making you backtrack on yourself in the real world without even realizing it. At the end of these sections, it'll then link you back up and you'll be able to fight together in the same area, but it'll feel like you've been apart even though you haven't. It's pretty ingenious. Penultimately, I want to talk about that boss fight because a hive tyrant does show up at certain points. Now, for an experience like this, I would expect the Hive Tyrant, which is a very big Tyrannid if you're not familiar, to show up and kind of be a static object, maybe throwing a couple of attacks at you, but standing in the same place and being a big bullet sponge. That's what I had predicted before going into this and when I actually spoke to the friends and family that I did this with, but I was incredibly wrong. The battle with the Hive Tyrant is pretty much identical to the flat screen game, which I simply did not expect at this caliber of movement and attack patterns. The Hive Tyrant will actually jump around, throw lane attacks at you, and really be a mobile threat, which is something that I've never seen before. When it's about to throw its Lash Whip at you, you'll see a red marker appear on the floor, and you'll need to run and get out of there physically. And I have some pretty amusing footage of me realizing this and then sprinting away from the Hive Tyrant attack.
Coming in from behind. Oh my god, yep. Oh.
It's something that if you're not familiar with virtual reality and how some of the boss fights usually work in VR games, especially VR arcade experiences like this, it'll sound slightly silly. But if you're familiar with VR and VR arcades and how usually when there's a boss fight it'll throw up a large health bar for you, where you'll have to dodge maybe bullet hell style attacks, it's such a breath of fresh air to have a mobile boss enemy like this, where you actually have to haul yourself pretty quickly to get out of the way. It was terrifying, it was fun, it was everything that I hoped a boss fight with a Tyrannid of this size would be in VR, and so close and reminiscent to the fight with the Hive Tyrant in the Space Marine 2 flat game. Just a couple final remarks as well. There is a scoreboard in this, and at the end it'll show you kind of how far you've run and how many enemies you've killed and all that good stuff. So if you're into that competitive side, you can fight for the highest score with your friends and see who comes out on top, which is awesome. And there is a hard mode if you end up coming back for another try, or if you say want to just jump in at the hardest difficulty. This will enable friendly fire and team killing, buff up some health for the Tyrannids, and decrease some health for you guys and damage and all that good stuff. But if you do end up jumping in and doing hard mode and find that it is too difficult, you can ask the games master that is there and running your session to turn it down, and you'll be back to normal after that. Finally, I just want to say, I've spent this video talking about resolution and frame rate and enemy design and weapon design and variety and VR mechanics and gameplay and level mapping, but at the root of all of that is a very fun experience, and clearly an experience that's had a lot of, money put behind it, because of course this is an official Games Workshop product, and also just how much care was put into this. From the weapons that feel as they should in this Warhammer setting, to the swarms of Tyranids, to simply the environments that you're placed in, there's so much to love here as a Warhammer and a VR fan. So, if you do want to get your hands on it, head online and see where your nearest zero latency VR location is for Space Marine Defenders of Avarax. I'll leave a link to the website in the description below. But what I would really love is to see an experience like this, even this experience, just brought onto other VR platforms. Make this a demo that we can have on PSVR2 or on PCVR. I'd love to be able to jump in, even with joystick controls, and just shoot Tyranids whenever I want. I know these things are usually exclusive to these VR arcade locations though, but if there's any chance at all, I want to see that happen, please. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you did enjoy. Thank you again for Zero Latency for having me down. It's just been a fantastic experience, and I will be returning to try the full release build. Thank you to our patrons and YouTube members: Luke Bentley, Phil Irving, Hazit Mirza, Ace Gamer, Hippie Pickle, Gen 007, The License to Chill, Sun WTF, Fat Controllers, The Game Cat, Andrew Ehrenreich, Jason Parker, Lamar Hall, Jordy Vansma, Lemon64K, Outcast VR, Property 777, and Gundy Gundy. If you want to join the Patreon or YouTube membership, all those links are down below, and I hope to see you all in the next one.